The deep silence of space shattered as the scout ship tumbled through the dark moon's thin atmosphere. Inside, warning lights flashed red across every control panel, and the ship's lone occupant fought desperately with the failing controls. Rose gripped the steering columns tighter, her four-fingered hands trembling as she tried to level the falling vessel. Her pale blue skin glistened with sweat, and her large, silvery eyes reflected the chaos of emergency signals flooding her view screen. Navigation offline. Engine core failing. Impact imminent, the ship's computer announced in its emotionless voice. The rocky surface of the moon rushed up to meet her. Rose knew she had only seconds to make a decision. Following her training, she diverted all remaining power to the impact shields. The ship's hull groaned under the strain of entry, pieces of the outer plating tearing away like leaves in a storm. "Please," she whispered to no one in particular, "just let me survive this." The ground came up fast, too fast. Rose closed her eyes and braced for impact. The crash was deafening. Metal screamed against rock as the ship carved a deep trench across the moon's surface. Emergency foam filled the cockpit, cushioning Rose as the vessel flipped end over end. When it finally stopped, silence returned, broken only by the soft hiss of ruptured pipes and the irregular beeping of damaged systems. Rose hung upside down in her restraints, the emergency foam slowly dissolving around her. She moved each limb carefully, checking for injuries. Finding only bruises, she released her harness and dropped to what was now the ceiling of her inverted ship. The emergency lights cast an eerie purple glow through the smoke-filled cabin. Rose pulled herself toward the main console, hoping to assess the damage. Most screens were cracked or dark, but one still functioned enough to display the ship's status. The results made her heart sink. Main engines, destroyed. Life support, 40% functional. Communications array, severe damage. Distress beacon, offline. She slumped against the wall, letting the reality of her situation sink in. The ship's remaining power would keep life support running for maybe 2 weeks. The emergency food and water might last a month if she rationed carefully. But none of that mattered without a working distress beacon. Rose knew the protocols of her people all too well. The collective never risked multiple ships for rescue missions. Their philosophy was simple: the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. A damaged scout ship in unexplored space wasn't worth the risk of losing more vessels or crews. She was alone, truly alone. Using her wrist computer, Rose ran a scan of the surrounding area. The moon had a thin but breathable atmosphere, though the temperature dropped dangerously low during its long nights. The impact had scattered pieces of her ship across several hundred meters, and she would need to salvage what she could before the next nightfall. As she prepared to exit the ship, Rose checked her environmental suit for damage. It was intact, but like everything else, its power supply was limited. She would need to be careful with how often she ventured outside. The airlock wheezed as it cycled, and Rose stepped out onto alien soil for the first time. The crash site was a scene of devastation. Her once sleek scout ship lay broken and twisted, its silver hull stained with dirt and scored by deep gashes. Parts of the engine section still smoldered, sending thin columns of smoke into the rust-colored sky. Rose began the grim task of collecting useful debris, trying to keep her mind focused on survival rather than the hopelessness of her situation. She had trained for emergency scenarios, but nothing in her training had prepared her for this complete isolation. As she worked, a glint of light in the distance caught her attention. For a moment, hope flared in her chest, but she quickly dismissed it. This moon was far from any established trade routes or colonies. No one would be out here. She was wrong. 3 days after the crash, Rose sat in the dim light of her damaged ship, watching the life support readings drop lower. The numbers on the screen told a story she didn't want to read. Oxygen recycling was failing, and the temperature controls were becoming unstable. She had managed to salvage some parts from the wreckage, but most of the critical systems were beyond repair. Her technical training felt useless against the extent of the damage. Each attempt to fix something seemed to reveal three more problems. The moon's day-night cycle made everything worse. During the brief daylight hours, the temperature soared to uncomfortable levels, forcing her to use precious power for cooling. But the nights, the endless nights that lasted nearly 30 Earth hours, brought bone-chilling cold that ate through her ship's damaged hull. Rose wrapped herself in thermal blankets as she reviewed her survival logs. Day 3, she spoke into her personal recorder. Food supplies at 92%. Water recycling at 65% efficiency. Primary life support failing faster than expected. Secondary systems. She paused, looking at the flashing red warning light. Secondary systems critical. A loud crack from outside made her jump. The extreme temperature changes were stressing the ship's hull. Each night brought new noises, new warnings of her shelter slowly breaking apart. She moved to the small window she had cleared of emergency foam. The landscape outside was like something from a nightmare. Jagged rocks stretched toward a sky that never quite turned black, even at night. The moon's parent planet hung low on the horizon, its gas giant form casting a perpetual twilight glow. Her people had always taught that isolation was safety. They believed that contact with other species brought only danger and corruption. Now that ideology was going to kill her. Rose checked her long-range scanners again, more out of habit than hope. The screen flickered to life, showing the same empty readings as always. But then, something changed. A small blip appeared at the edge of the range, moving slowly across the display. Her heart raced. Could it be a rescue ship? Had the collective changed their minds? The signature was all wrong. The energy pattern didn't match any ship from her people. It was something else, something unknown. Rose enhanced the scan as much as her damaged systems would allow. The ship was large, bulky, with a power signature that seemed impossibly inefficient by her people's standards. It was the kind of ship her training had warned her about, the ships of primitive species. As if responding to her thoughts, the environmental system chose that moment to release a loud, grinding sound. The temperature inside the ship dropped suddenly, and her breath began to fog in the air. No, no, no. Rose rushed to the control panel, her fingers flying over the keys. Nothing responded. The backup systems were failing. A new warning flashed across her screen. Life support critical. Estimated failure in 48 hours. Rose slumped in her chair, her silver eyes reflecting the red warning lights. She had a choice to make. According to everything she had been taught, those primitive ships out there represented danger. Their crews were unpredictable, violent, and technologically inferior. But she was going to die here alone if she didn't do something. The scanner blip moved closer, and now she could make out more details. It was a mining vessel, designed for deep space resource extraction. Its course would bring it within visual range in about 6 hours. Rose looked around her failing ship, at the frost beginning to form on the inner walls, at the dimming lights and the dying systems. Everything she had been taught told her to hide, to power down her remaining systems, and hope the alien ship didn't notice her. But as another shudder ran through the ship, and the temperature dropped even further, she knew her people's protocols were going to kill her. She had to make a choice. Trust her training and die, or risk everything on the hope that maybe, just maybe, her people were wrong about the primitives. The mining ship grew larger on her scanner, and Rose made her decision. Jack wasn't supposed to be this far from the main mining operation. His small scout ship was meant to stay within the designated survey zone, but something about that strange energy reading had caught his attention. After 15 years of space mining, he had learned to trust his instincts. "Base, this is Scout 7, he radioed, following up on an unusual signature in Sector 4. Might be worth checking out." "Copy that, Scout 7," the response crackled through. "But don't take too long. Storm front moving in." The scout ship crested a ridge of dark rocks, and Jack's breath caught in his throat. There, in a long gouge carved into the moon's surface, lay a ship unlike anything he had ever seen. Its sleek silver hull was clearly not of human design. though now it lay broken and twisted in the rocky soil. "Base, you're not going to believe this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I got what looks like a crashed ship. Definitely not one of ours." The radio crackled with sudden excitement. "Hostile. Negative. Looks abandoned. I'm going to check for survivors." Jack landed his scout ship at a safe distance and suited up. The moon's thin atmosphere was breathable in an emergency, but protocol demanded full environmental gear for unknown situations. He checked his oxygen levels and grabbed his emergency kit before stepping out onto the rocky surface. As he approached the crash site, his suit's sensors picked up faint power readings. Something in there was still alive, at least electronically. The ship's design was beautiful despite its damage. All curved lines and smooth surfaces, like it had been grown rather than built. A movement caught his eye. Something inside the ship was watching him through a frost-covered window. Jack raised his hand slowly, showing he was unarmed. "Hello," he called over his suit's external speakers. "I'm here to help." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a hiss of escaping air, a panel in the ship's side slid open. A figure emerged, and Jack found himself face to face with his first alien. She, at least he thought it was a she, stood slightly shorter than him. Her skin was pale blue, and her large silvery eyes regarded him with a mixture of fear and desperation. She wore what looked like a damaged environmental suit of her own, though much more advanced than his. The alien raised her four-fingered hand in what seemed like a greeting. From a device at her throat came a series of musical tones that his translator couldn't make sense of. Jack pointed to himself. "Jack," he said clearly. Then he pointed to her. She seemed to understand. "Rose," she replied, the words sounding slightly musical in her voice. She gestured at her ship, then made a shivering motion. The message was clear enough. Her ship was losing heat. Jack pointed to his scout ship. "I can help," he said. "Warm there. Safe." Rose looked back at her crippled vessel, conflict clear on her alien features. Whatever she was, her species clearly had rules about contact with others. But the growing frost on her ship's hull made the decision for her. She nodded. As they walked to his ship, Jack radioed base again. "Going to need a full rescue team out here. And maybe get the xenobiologists on the line. We've got a situation." Rose watched him speak into his radio, her silver eyes taking in every detail of his ship as they approached. It wasn't pretty like hers, all angular metal and exposed machinery, but it was warm and functional. Inside his scout ship, Rose immediately went to the window, watching her own vessel grow smaller in the distance. Jack could see the worry in her posture. Whatever she was, wherever she came from, she had just taken an enormous risk by trusting him. He set the environmental controls for maximum heat and watched as she slowly relaxed in the warmth. Their eyes met, human and alien, and Jack smiled behind his faceplate. Sometimes, he thought, the most important discoveries happened when you broke the rules. "Welcome aboard," he said, knowing she probably couldn't understand the words, but hoping she would understand the feeling behind them. In the warmth of the scout ship's cabin, Rose watched as Jack worked with his communication system. Her translator was slowly beginning to make sense of the human language, piecing together patterns and meanings. What surprised her most was how freely they shared information. "Main base says they're sending a recovery team," Jack explained, speaking slowly for her benefit. "They'll be here in about 6 hours. Rose's translator converted his words into comprehensible meaning, but the implications made her nervous. More humans meant more complications. Her people's teachings echoed in her mind. Humans are unpredictable, dangerous. They solve problems with violence and possess an unstable civilization. Yet the human before her had shown nothing but kindness. Jack noticed her unease. "Everything okay?" he asked, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her. Rose touched her translator. "My people," she began, the device converting her musical language into rough human speech. "They say humans are dangerous, that you destroy everything you touch." To her surprise, Jack laughed. not mockingly, but with genuine amusement. "Yeah, we get that a lot," he said. "But look around. We're mining workers, not soldiers. Most of us just want to make a living and maybe see something new." A light flashed on his console, and Rose instinctively tensed. Jack held up his hands in a calming gesture. "Just the storm warning," he explained. "We've got some nasty weather heading this way. Good thing I found you when I did." Through the viewport, Rose could see dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The moon's unusual atmosphere created storms that could last for days, with winds strong enough to throw rocks like missiles. "Your ship," Jack said, checking his readings. "The basic design looks similar to some of our older models. I might be able to help repair it, at least enough to get the life support working again." Rose blinked in surprise. "You would share your technology?" "Share? No, just basic repairs. Look, I'm a mining engineer. Fixing things is what I do." He pulled up some schematics on his screen. "See, nothing classified, just standard maintenance procedures." As they talked, Rose began to see the flaws in her people's teachings. These humans weren't the primitives she'd been taught to fear. They were different, yes, but their technology had its own elegant solutions. Where her people sought perfection, humans embraced adaptability. The radio crackled. "Scout 7, this is recovery team. ETA 5 hours. Storm's slowing us down. How's our visitor?" Jack looked at Rose before responding. "She's fine. Ship's in bad shape, though. Requesting permission to begin basic repairs once the storm passes." There was a pause before the reply came. "Granted, but stick to essential systems only. We don't want any diplomatic incidents." As they waited for the recovery team, Jack showed Rose their mining operations schematics. She was amazed by the scale of it. Hundreds of humans working together, sharing resources and knowledge freely. "Why do you help me?" she finally asked. "My people would never." "Because you needed help," Jack interrupted. "Simple as that. Maybe your people do things differently, but we don't leave anyone to die out here. Space is dangerous enough without making enemies of each other." A massive thunderclap shook the scout ship, and the storm finally reached them. Through the howling wind and driving rain, Rose could barely see her crashed vessel. Everything she had been taught, everything she had believed about humans, was being challenged. "When the storm passes," Jack said, checking his instruments, "we'll get your ship working again. Then you can decide what you want to do next." Rose touched the cold window, watching lightning illuminate the alien landscape. Her people's protocol said she should remain distant, avoid contamination by primitive ideas. But as she watched Jack calmly pilot them through the storm, she realized something important. Sometimes survival meant learning to trust. The recovery team was coming, and with them would come decisions she wasn't ready to make. But for now, in this small human ship, she was safe. And that was enough to make her question everything she had ever been taught about humanity. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by ice and frost. Rose stood with Jack and 3 other human engineers beside her damaged ship, watching them assess the damage. The recovery team had arrived just after sunrise, bringing tools and supplies she'd never seen before. "Main power core is shot," one engineer said, emerging from the ship's interior. "But we can rig something temporary from our spare parts." That's when Rose's wrist communicator suddenly activated, making a sound it hadn't made since the crash. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw the message displayed. The collective had detected her location, and they had detected the humans. The message was clear and cold. "Terminate all contact immediately. Primitive species detected. Survival protocols rescinded. You know your duty." Rose felt sick. Her duty, according to the collective, was to activate her ship's self-destruct sequence rather than risk cultural contamination. They would rather see her die than accept help from humans. "Everything okay?" Jack asked, noticing her distress. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Rose quickly hid her communicator. "My people," she said carefully, "they know I'm here. They know about you. The humans stopped working. Jack stepped closer, his face showing concern rather than fear. Is that a problem? They want me to. Rose struggled with the words. They say I must destroy my ship and myself rather than risk contamination from primitive species. A heavy silence fell over the group. The other engineers looked to Jack, waiting for his response. That's insane, he finally said. They'd rather you die than accept help. Rose nodded sadly. The collective believes isolation is survival. Contact with other species is forbidden. They think it leads to corruption of our pure culture. Pure culture? One of the engineers snorted. No offense, but that sounds like fear talking, not wisdom. Jack held up his hand for silence. Rose, he said gently, what do you want to do? Not what they want. What do you want? The question struck her like a physical blow. In her entire life, no one had ever asked what she wanted. The collective decided everything, from birth to death, all for the greater good. She looked at her ship, then at the humans who had worked so hard to help her. In just a few days, they had shown her more kindness than her own people had in a lifetime. Her communicator beeped again, a final warning. Rose straightened her back. I want to live. I want to learn. The collective is wrong about humans. Jack smiled. Then we'll help you. But you should know, this decision might mean you can't go back. I know. Rose touched her ship's hull one last time. But staying with people who would rather see me dead than accept help, that's not living. The engineers returned to work with renewed purpose. Rose helped where she could, sharing her knowledge of the ship's systems. As they worked, she sent one final message to the collective. I choose life over protocol. I choose growth over stagnation. If this makes me corrupt in your eyes, then perhaps your vision is what needs cleansing. She deleted her communicator's protocols after sending the message. There would be consequences, she knew. The collective wouldn't let this pass without response. But for the first time in her life, Rose felt truly free. We've got power. One of the engineers called out. The ship's systems began humming to life, repaired with a combination of human ingenuity and her own technology. Jack put a hand on her shoulder. Whatever comes next, you're not alone. We protect our own out here. Rose looked at her ship, now powered by human technology, a physical symbol of cooperation the collective had deemed impossible. She had made her decision, and despite the uncertainty ahead, she knew it was right. Thank you, she said, and meant it more than any words she'd ever spoken. For showing me that sometimes the greatest wisdom comes from those we're taught to fear. The sun rose higher over the moon's horizon, casting long shadows across the ice-covered ground. A new day was beginning, and with it, a new chapter in Rose's life, one she would write for herself. The mining base's main hangar buzzed with activity as humans and machines worked together on Rose's ship. After her decision to defy the collective, the human mining colony had fully embraced her presence. Engineers swarmed over her vessel, combining their technology with hers in ways that would have been considered heresy by her people. The power core integration is complete, Rose announced, emerging from beneath a panel. She had learned to wear the bulky human work clothes, though they felt strange against her blue skin. Your fusion cells work better than our original power source. Jack nodded, checking the readings on his tablet. Sometimes the simple solution is the best one. Your people's technology is amazing, but they overcomplicate things. Over the past week, Rose had discovered that humans had a refreshing way of approaching problems. Where her people would spend years perfecting a single solution, humans would try 10 different approaches and keep what worked. A loud alarm suddenly blared through the hangar. Rose's heart jumped until she realized it was just the shift change signal. She was still getting used to how noisy humans were, how they filled every space with life and movement. Look at this, called one of the engineers Tom, from inside the ship. Their navigation system uses quantum entanglement for instant positioning. We could learn a lot from this. Rose smiled. That was another surprise about humans. their endless enthusiasm for learning. Every discovery was met with excitement rather than the cautious suspicion her people would have shown. Base command to Hangar 3. A voice crackled over the intercom. We're picking up some unusual readings at the edge of our sensor range. Might want to speed things up. Everyone knew what that meant. The collective was coming. Instead of panic, Rose watched in amazement as the humans simply worked faster. They had known this might happen and had planned for it. Teams moved with practiced efficiency, completing repairs that should have taken weeks in just days. We're not letting them take you, Jack said firmly, seeing her worried expression. Unless that's what you want. Rose shook her head. My people don't allow second chances. Once you break protocol, you're considered corrupted. They would rather eliminate me than risk their precious isolation. Then we better make sure this ship can fly, Tom called out. Because you're one of us now, whether your people like it or not. The words hit Rose hard. One of us. The collective had always preached unity, but their unity came from conformity. These humans offered belonging while celebrating differences. As they worked, Rose shared stories about her people's technology, their culture, their beliefs. The humans listened eagerly, asking questions and offering comparisons to their own experiences. There was no fear of contamination, no worry about preserving purity, just the joy of learning from each other. Power systems at 100%, announced the engineering team. Hull integrity restored. Life support optimal. Rose ran her hand along the ship's hull. It looked different now. A hybrid of two technologies, two approaches to solving the same problems. Like her, it had been transformed by this encounter. Final system check, Jack said, bringing up the diagnostics. Everything's green. She'll fly better than ever. The alarm sounded again, but this time it was the proximity alert. The collective ships were getting closer. Rose, Jack said seriously, you know you don't have to leave. We can protect you here. She looked around the hangar at the humans who had helped her, who had shown her a different way of living. They were ready to defend her against her own people, not out of protocol or duty, but because they cared. I know, she said, but I need to face them. Show them they're wrong about humans, about everything. The humans gathered around her ship, each offering words of encouragement and support. They had broken every rule in her people's books, crossed boundaries that were supposed to be sacred, and in doing so had shown her what real civilization looked like. Whatever happens, Rose said, you've taught me that the greatest strength comes from working together, not staying apart. The collective ships were approaching, but for the first time since her crash, Rose felt no fear. She had found something her people had lost long ago. The courage to change. 1 year after the crash that changed everything, Rose stood at the observation deck of the human mining station, watching as another collective ship approached. This time, however, they came not with threats but with curiosity. Ready for another diplomatic meeting? Jack asked, joining her at the window. He'd been promoted to Chief of Alien Relations, a position created specifically because of her. They're sending a younger group this time, Rose said, reading the ship's identification signals. The ones who were most interested in my reports about humans. The past year had been challenging. After Rose's defiance, the collective had initially threatened to declare war on the human mining colony. But she had stood her ground, broadcasting evidence of human kindness and innovation to her people. The videos of humans risking their lives to save her, sharing their knowledge freely, and celebrating differences had caused a stir among the younger generation of her species. Hard to believe a year ago, they'd wanted you dead, Jack commented. Now they're sending students to learn from us. Rose smiled. Her skin had developed a slightly darker blue tone from exposure to the station's lights, marking her as different from her people. She wore a mixture of human and collective clothing, another symbol of the bridge she had become. The station's main hangar opened to receive the visiting ship. Unlike the first diplomatic vessels, this one showed signs of human influence in its design, more practical, less focused on perfect symmetry. Ambassador Rose, called a young voice. One of her people, barely into adulthood, emerged from the ship. "We've studied all your reports. Is it true that humans learn through failure?" "Among other things," Rose laughed. "They believe making mistakes is the best teacher." The young visitors looked around in wonder at the human station. Where once her people had seen primitive design, they now recognized the beauty and functionality. The streaming activity, the noise, the organized chaos, it all represented a different kind of perfection. "Show them the education center," Jack suggested. After the first successful contact, the station had set up a place where both species could learn from each other. Rose led the group through the station. Humans and members of the collective worked side by side, each bringing their own strengths to various projects. In the research lab, they had combined human creativity with collective precision to solve problems neither species could handle alone. "But what about contamination?" one of the young visitors asked. "The mixing of cultures." "Look around," Rose gestured. "Has either culture been destroyed, or have we both grown stronger by learning from each other?" The evidence was everywhere. Human ships now incorporated some of the collective's efficient designs, while collective vessels had adopted human redundancy systems. Both species had benefited from the exchange. Later, in her quarters, Rose updated her personal log. Day 372 since first contact. "The change in my people continues." Today's visitors asked questions the first diplomatic team would never have considered. They see humans not as primitives to be avoided, but as partners to learn from. Jack knocked on her door, carrying a datapad. "The mining corporation just approved the joint venture. Your people's precision mining techniques combined with our exploration experience. They're calling it the first official human collective partnership." Rose saved her log entry. Her quarters reflected her new life. Human comfort items mixed with collective artifacts, a physical representation of the bridge she had become between two worlds. "We were wrong about so much," she said softly. "The collective thought isolation would keep us pure, keep us strong. Instead, it was making us stagnant." Through her window, she could see the moon where she had crashed, now home to a thriving joint mining operation. Her near death there had given birth to something remarkable. Proof that different species could not just coexist, but flourish together. "Ready for tomorrow's teaching session?" Jack asked. "The new group wants to learn human humor." Rose laughed. "That might be the biggest challenge yet. But that's what I love about all this. There's always something new to learn, some new boundary to cross." The station's lights dimmed, simulating night, but the activity never truly stopped. Like the humans had taught her, life wasn't about maintaining perfect order. It was about growing, changing, and sometimes breaking protocol to discover something wonderful. Her crash landing hadn't been an ending after all. It had been the beginning of something far greater than the collective had ever imagined possible.